Hey everyone, it's Lee again with Creative Aging with Arts Council OKC. This week we're going to do a Watercolor Galaxy nebula. And so there isn't going to be any drawing. I'm sure some of you will be like, yay. So the materials, watercolor paper, watercolors, and we're just going to use the pan watercolors. Paintbrushes of various sizes, paper towels for blotting, of course water, and then you can have masking tape or painter's tape, which is optional if you want to tape down your paper. Okay, so we're going to get started, and basically what you can do is figure out what kind of colors you want to use, and today anything goes. So, and then you'll just start by kind of getting some water on your watercolors to get them prepped and ready. So, all right, let's get started. Okay. So, as you can see, I have my paper taped down here, and this is just some blue painter's tape. Now, you certainly don't have to tape it down, and this is a 9x12 sheet of paper, but you can certainly do something smaller if that's where you want to start. I just thought it might be a little easier to show you on this one. And you have a little more flexibility if it's, well, there's two ways about it. It's nice if you have it taped down, because then when you have to use the hairdryer, I also should have mentioned the hairdryer is handy, because we're going to start off light, and then, you want to let each layer kind of dry a little bit in between, and then the hairdryer will help speed up the process. So taping down is great. It also gives you a little border. Now, it's also fun to have a really fluid edge, or you can paint all the way off the edge. Totally up to you. Today, I just thought I would tape it down so that when I use the hairdryer, it won't blow off the table. So, and then also it's handy to have multiple cups of water if you need them. I'm going to start off by getting the colors that I think I want to use wet, just to kind of get them ready. All right, because the under layer, you're going to use a lot of water and just a little bit of paint. And then each time we come back, we'll use brighter color, more color and less water. And also we can do initially is start by taking a bigger brush and clean water, and we're just going to kind of wet the paper, because this way it kind of gives the paint a bit of a fluid movement here. Okay. Now, I put the paper on the wrong side, I guess, since I'm right-handed. And I guess I could paint left-handed today, but we'll just leave it like this. Now, one thing I want you to think about, now remember, galaxies and nebulas, anything goes. Okay, so we're just going to try something different today. Now, but be mindful of where you want, there are usually bright spots in it. So just take that into consideration, and then leave some white underneath. Okay, so I'm just going to start, and we're not making any lines today. Okay. No straight lines. I'm just kind of coming in here, and we're letting the water do some of the work for us, okay? And then you can just kind of add in different colors, and they can blend, or you can have them sitting separately, okay? Okay. So see, I'm just pushing water around and the paint around, just to kind of, now what I'm trying to do is kind of keep this central bit a little wider. So I'm going to kind of steer away from it, but just keep adding color. And then, because when you're doing the watercolor, it's going to dry lighter, so it's totally fine that, I'm doing a dark purple. It's fine, because with the water already on the paper, it's going to dissipate. And so I'm just going to add in And then when we do the stars later, you know, we'll do something different. But, so just kind of keep adding colors you want in here. You know, and nebulas have lots of different colors. So if you want to do something rainbow colored or with like greens and oranges, totally fine too. I'll try not to lean too much of my head in the picture. Alright, now let's see how it's going to come up in here a little. And we're going to do multiple passes of this, so don't worry. So see, it's really, you know, and this is it's gonna look strange for a little bit, but you can see how the wetter the paper is, then the paint really flows nicely. But also the other issue with that is, and then what you can do is while the paper is kind of starting to dry a little bit, kind of come back in a little bit in other areas and add little bits of darker. So where you have more, you know, less water on your brush and more paint. I'm just going to come back into some of those areas. See, I'm just kind of bouncing around. And then if something gets a little too straight line, then you can kind of come back in with your brush. See, I just put water on it and then dabbed it off, and then I'm going to come in here and okay. You can do the same thing with paper towel, you know, if you want to blot some areas away, like you can wad it up. Now the paper is really pretty wet, so, and if you want to, you can kind of come in and this is an option of kind of changing, you know, some of the color and depth of it too, where you can take some out. And then, ooh, it's really wet on that edge. Okay. And that's fine because we're going to add darker stuff too. So, we need to really kind of let this sit just a minute. And, yeah, okay. So I'm going to borrow this for a sec. Another thing that I like to do is I'm just going to take a piece of cardboard and kind of dry it a little bit. And now remember, though this is a simple process, it's going to take a little bit of time. So hopefully I'm not making people too dizzy by using this. Okay. Now you'll be able to relax and take your time and pause and stop. So I'm going to use a different brush. And just experiment with using different sizes brushes too. So now I'm going to use very little water and just kind of come back in and add some stuff here. And see, the paper still has enough moisture on it that it's going to kind of have things kind of trail. All right. And then also, you know, I'm not really worried about having too hard of an edge on something because you can always come back and we can soften it a little bit too. But I'm just kind of coming in here and still I'm not really pressing hard. I'm just kind of bouncing off the paper. And then if you think it's got too hard of an edge, then just dip it in water and blot it off and then come back on your paper. See, just and all paper's a little different. This is a little thinner watercolor paper. It should be what you guys probably have. So it may buckle a little bit, and that's also kind of why I like kind of having it taped down a little. because then even if it's buckling a little bit, it'll still be alright. Ooh, I'm adding some turquoise, and that's a little heavy. But the nice thing is you can just kind of keep blending it in. But you can see that I'm using a flat brush, and sometimes it works really well, and other times it may have, you know, a different kind of edge that you may not like as well. So you might want to use a round tip. Just kind of experiment and see what you like. And you can see that the paper is starting to dry, which is good. We'd want that, but you can also be aware that it'll hold your line more. So that's why keep moving. And then, you know, by adding other colors in here, you can change it. And then use a round tip just to see how that works. And I like the way it works better. I mean, they serve different purposes. So honestly, whatever fits with what you want to do is good. You know, a lot of making art is just experimenting and finding out, you know, different ways of using the tools and how you like it in the mediums. So, all right. Okay, let's see. Okay. So, just keep adding. Because one of the things you do want to have as your end product is contrast. You want to have really nice brights, you know, which you'll have with the stars, and then also you want to have some really nice deep dark colors too. So see how just by adding in some little bit darker purple, and this line up here is really, this part of the paper gets really dry, but that's okay because we're going to come in and around the edges I'm going to have some nice dark parts. So when you can even start doing some of that in here. A little bit. I really like black and blue together, and I still want that kind of as a base layer here. Purpley black. So try not to get my head in there. Hard not to though. Okay. And also in this case, you know, sometimes if it's easier for you to stand up, feel free, but I'm just trying to kind of do it a few different ways so you guys can know there are any number of options and ways of doing this. So I'm going to highlight in there, leave it like that. Okay. So see, this is just really actually very simple and kind of fun because it's, I know some of you are a little wary of doing abstract stuff, but this is kind of fun where you can just kind of let go of any really kind of preconceived image. Now, you can get online too, and they have beautiful photographs from like the Hubble telescope, and you can look at some of that if you want a specific visual reference, okay? Because on this one, I'm just kind of making it up as I go. And because sometimes, you know, you kind of get in there and you have an idea of how I think it should look. And, you know, and your picture will kind of dictate where you want to put your next line and stuff. So see, I'm just kind of bouncing around, blotting it, rinsing my brush off, and okay. And then coming back and softening some of these edges. Okay, let's see. You know, and sometimes you put in a color and you're like, I'm not really sure about that, and that's okay. Just blot it and kind of take some of it off so you can still get those bits of color underneath, but then they're not as dominant. Okay, but then kind of mixes in with some other stuff and makes it a little interesting. Now, as you can kind of see, my paper has been so wet, and I'm continue working on it, that if it starts getting pilly, then that's a really good sign that you need to stop working it and let it rest, meaning let it dry. So I'm gonna probably need to stop here in a minute and do that, because it, you know, some really heavy duty, thick, nice watercolor paper will really hold up to a lot of water and brush movement, but sometimes if you have stuff that's just a little thinner, you need to kind of give it a minute, especially since we're kind of pulling color off and then wetting it again. Okay, so if you're getting the idea, it's coming together, but this area in here, we really kind of need to leave it alone. And then I'll kind of come in here and do some other darks. So just kind of, if that area needs a little breather, then just leave it alone and move into some other area. Okay. All right. And then, whoop, I need to not do that. You just kind of, and then experiment with different colors and see. Sometimes they may not have the same effect you think. You know, so just kind of have fun with it. Or it might go, ooh, that creates a really interesting something, so. All right. So, see, this is nice because you want to have some nice bright whites, but you also want to kind of fill some of it in, so. You just keep going and. I think I'm going to need to take this here. And sometimes you just need to blot some of that off because it's kind of... Now remember, when you're blotting, do not scrub your paper when it's wet. That will make it really pill, and it won't like it at all. So, okay. And then let's take some more. Here we go. I'm just kind of blending and moving and see, like anything goes. Just kind of okay. Like in here, it looks a little heavy with just that light blue that isn't quite working, but that's okay. We're just gonna kind of blend it in with this purple. I'm going to kind of bring this up. Soften some things. Okay. And so if you're using a circular motion to kind of soften some edges, that works better than if you're trying to just to use a line here. Okay. Okay. All right, but you're getting the idea. And see, what's funny is I kind of had something different in mind when I first started doing this as far as colors, but then you just kind of get into it and kind of see what feels right here. All right. And of course, you know, I celebrate whatever colors you guys want to use. Just okay. All right. So now I'm gonna do a little blur from here. All right. See, I'm just kind of rolling it in my fingers because I don't really want a straight line. And so sometimes kind of pushing it while you're rolling it, kind of, and then you might go, that's crazy, and then don't do it. Because then you can kind of come back in here and soften it up, because I wanted to get some darker purple in there, but then you can also go back on it and kind of shove it in a different direction. Okay. Ooh. And then stuff that looks kind of flat in here, that's okay. You're still going to come back and do some other darker colors, but sometimes we just kind of need to let it sit, but then you can kind of come in here with some darker and see if it's wet enough. It's going to keep feathering out, so we kind of want to wait. You can add a little bit of this dark stuff first, and then kind of wait a minute, because we'll come back and do that. But so you can kind of look at this and go, well, some of this seems a little bit heavy, so we're going to kind of come back in, and I'm just rinsing my brush off and blotting it, and then coming back and taking some of the paint off. So, alright. Okay. Alright. Okay, what I did is I just kind of took a minute to take the hairdryer to this. So it's really mostly dry, which is good, which is what we want. So right now, I'm going to go back in and take some purple and black, and so we're going to start adding some really dark. I like using purple and black, or black and dark blue, so we're just going to kind of come in here and start adding some really heavy darks here. Okay, and you can even mix a little bit in there too. So, just so we have that high contrast, okay? And definitely want, your paper really needs to be dry for this. And you can tell right over here it wasn't quite dry enough. That's okay. You can add it again. And I'm really not using much water at all. I'm just using mostly pigment here. Alright, here we go. Okay. Because, watercolors can sometimes be, kind of chalky flat, and black for sure. So I always like adding, color into it, because it kind of keeps it from getting so flat looking. So, right. And I'm just using this big brush to kind of add in some spots. So, and I'm gonna, and that's another thing, like, because I did tape the paper down, I have to come at it from a different angle. And that's okay, I mean, but just, it does kind of create a little some interesting issues. And if you get a little too big, then when you feel if your big brush is just getting a little too much in your way, you can just kind of switch. Because we're going to come back in here anyway and add add some other smaller dark lines. So, and there are really, really dark, deep dark bits of the galaxies and nebulas. So, you know, it's fine if you have like heavy lines, but if you want stuff softened, then just kind of soften the edges as you go and kind of blend them into the purples or whatever colors. Okay. So now that this big one's been sitting in here, kind of make sure you kind of blot it off again. Alright, so now the blue. Okay. And it's fine. You can kind of come all the way down in here. And I think it helps if you try not to think about it too much. I'm just kind of coming in and then. Alright. So. Kind of want that corner to be pretty heavy dark, so. Alright. But you can see the heavy contrast really is starting to kind of bring out your shapes and make it really kind of start looking like a galaxy, okay? Whoop. And anything goes, like I said, so really it can look like anything. So even if you make marks that you're really not sure about, it's okay, it's going to be just fine. Okay. And, you know, just think about if you do want any areas that you want to kind of keep light, then don't put some of the black in there. You know, because it may just have this really interesting glow down in the corner. And you can leave it like that. And then you can also change your mind later and fill it in, so. So, and then I do want these parts up here to be a little darker, so I'm going to come back over here. So, and then experiment to see what shape or what size brush you want to use, and I'm going to kind of come in here with the I'm just going to bounce them around. No, we're just going to have fun with it. You guys are getting the idea. And like I said, if at any time there are parts of your paper that look like they're not really happy because it's really wet, then just let it dry and don't keep scrubbing it. Okay. And then, you know, we can use a smaller brush too for other little bitty veins that are just kind of popping around. So just now, sometimes when you're doing this kind of stuff, it's really hard to not really kind kind of see what you're doing. So if you need to stop and stand up and get a different perspective, I recommend it, because I know sometimes it's hard for me to tell what I'm doing too. So, but you're getting the idea of how this works. And then if you want to add a little heavier stuff even over here, even though you're still kind of keeping this area a little bit lighter, then just still add a little bit over here. Just darken that a little bit up a little bit. And if anything looks a little squirrely, just kind of go over it. And this is totally fine if you have shaky hands. This works just fine with that, because that's the whole point of this. There are no straight lines in this. You know, and just have fun with it. And you can use your brush, you know, on its side and just and then what I'll do is I'll stop here in just a sec, get this to, you know, where it's really nice and dry, and then we'll do some stars. Okay? All right. Okay. As you can see, I've added a little bit more, you know, I dried it and then came back and added some darker colors and just a slow build up and softened some edges, left some hard ones, because you know this is a, you know, outer space, so it's fine however it looks. And I did try to leave some whites and lighter areas. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to add stars. So what I have is just a piece of black construction paper. I recommend you do is experiment with how you're going to do your stars. Okay, I have a few different brushes. Now you can also use a toothbrush if you want to. I'm not using a toothbrush. I have in the past, and we're using white watercolor. You know, now if you have any white acrylic ink, you can also use that. But we're just going to do white watercolor. And it's really important that your watercolor painting is completely dry in order for this to work best. Because if it's still a little wet, it'll sink down in to the paper and it won't be as bright white. So this is a flat brush and it's kind of stiff, so this is a way to do it, and we're just going to see what it looks like. So by doing this, you get nice little splatters. Okay, and another way, and you know, you still have water on your brush, but you have a lot of paint instead. Now something you can do is you can tap the end of this brush like that so it gets a little bit bigger. Another way would be to hold one brush and tap it like that if you don't want to get your fingers in it. And this is a little bit of a bigger brush, and so this one you'd have to tap harder. Okay, so you know, you can kind of experiment. And then at the end you can go and you can use a white gel pen if you really want to get some brighter white. But basically what you want to do is see how these work for you first. Okay, and make sure that your brushes are clean, and make sure that your white watercolor is clean and has plenty of water in it, but you've stirred up the paint enough that it's really nice and thick. Okay, and so now you're just gonna keep just adding lots of stars. Okay, and make sure that if you have any other pictures on it around, that you move them, otherwise they're gonna get white on them. Now remember, watercolor is totally fine on your clothes. It's not gonna hurt you, it'll wash right out. But if you have anything around the paper that you don't want to get anything on it, then move it, because this kind of flies everywhere. Okay, so now I'm gonna get a little more water here and here. Okay, and so sometimes then if you add more water to your white, test it first to see how it's gonna go. And like this one, I can't tell, but And just kind of experiment with how you spatter it, because sometimes you get bigger chunks. You know, if you do flat, or depends on how you hold the brush in your hand, okay? And if you like one way of doing it better than others, then keep doing that, okay? Let's see, I just put that in water, so I'm gonna wipe this off, but I kind of like the tapping it, but I'm using a bigger brush because I'm trying to get bigger stars, but I'm having a hard time. Okay, but you know, stars, the night sky has lots of little bitty bits, and then you can even go in with one of your brushes. And here again, make sure you have mostly paint on it, and then just go in and get wet, and just add some bigger stars. And you barely want to put any pressure, because you saw when I actually touched the paper, I bent it. So I'm going in pretty straight here. See? So you can have a bigger star. And just put them around. And here again, if you shake a little bit, no big deal. And this one, if you go, oh, well, that is a little bit wonky, it's fine. You can take a dry paper towel and kind of blot it a minute, or not. See, it dried really fast, and that's good. But you can actually touch that up later, so don't worry about it. Okay. So you have all these nice little bits of star, like little bitty ones, and now I'm just going to kind of come in and add some bigger ones. And I'll try not to lean into the camera, because you can't see past my big head, so. And like I said, I'm just barely touching the tip on the paper, but you just want to make sure you have plenty of paint on there. Make sure your watercolor is wet enough, because when it's hotter outside, everything dries a lot faster. So, and then I'm on this, I'm just kind of holding it in one place and kind of tapping it a few times, so. But you get the idea. And then, if you're sitting down and you have your paper taped down, you can stand up and look at it. And what I'm doing is I'm supporting my hand, or trying to, with my arm, so I'm not putting it in there. So I'm just going around and, woo, that's a big one. But that's okay. I'm not really going to worry about it, because once the white dries, some of it will kind of sink into the paper some. But because we let the paper dry really well, it's going to stay opaque longer. Okay? Because that's the thing, like I was saying earlier, is if your paper is too wet, then the white will sink right in and it will dissipate. Now it's kind of nice to have some that are a little transparent, translucent. Oops. Okay, so now you can see I use different ways of putting stars on, and then I actually went back and then did some bigger stars to add some brighter spots in the night sky or in the nebula. And so now we're going to take the tape off, and then just remember, just to kind of be careful when you're pulling your tape off. The tape hasn't been on here overly long, so it should be fine. And two, like this one, you don't have to put tape on it if you don't want to, because there are advantages to both. But you can see that after adding the stars, adding that nice bit of bright white in there, how it really brings the starry sky together. You know, and just remember, anything, you know, nothing is off limits. You can use whatever colors you want. But that kind of turned out kind of cool. So your star nebula can look like anything. You can have any colors you want. Just experiment and have fun. And you can have a loose edge or a taped off edge, or you can just go right off the edge of the paper. Whatever works. And just remember to wet your paper first. Do your first layers lightly with a lot of water. And then make sure that the light areas you want to keep white. Make sure you're mindful of when you keep adding more color to keep those areas still pretty white or light. You know, I think it's great if you have a little bit of light color in there, but you just don't want to make it too dark. And just kind of have fun and experiment with it. And this is something, you can totally do this. It just takes time, and if you need to use a hairdryer in between, feel free, or make sure you give your paper a rest and let it dry when you're adding your next big layers on. So all right, have fun with this one. It's really pretty exciting. So I look forward to seeing them when we get back in the classroom. And as always, take good care of yourselves, and we'll see you next time.